You're listening to Dark Rain Chronicles. The rain hides many things, but it also remembers. Secrets washed away, voices swallowed by the storm. These are the stories it brings back, and tonight, you will hear them. The peculiar gleam beneath the stranger's coat, catching the ferry's sodium lights. It wasn't merely a buckle. The truth, cold and metallic, coiled in my stomach. A firearm, tucked tight against his ribs. This passage across the water, I sensed with chilling clarity, would be no simple transit. What remained veiled was the night's brutal trajectory, culminating in a struggle not just for my own breath, but for every soul adrift on this churning sea. I confess a fondness for these waterborne journeys. A certain peace resides in the slow separation from land, the shoreline dissolving into mist as destiny pulls you forward. Hence, when business beckoned across the strait, the overnight ferry seemed a sensible, almost poetic choice over the sterile haste of flight. Cheaper, yes, but promising slumber cradled by the waves. An ill temper brewed in the heavens as we embarked. Clouds, the color of old bruises, massed overhead. The wind, sharp and insistent, flayed the water into white-flecked peaks. Yet the captain, radiating practiced confidence, dismissed it. "A bit of autumn bluster," he boomed, his smile unwavering. "She's handled far worse." I found my cabin, a compact haven with its narrow berth and a single cyclopean eye of a porthole. The familiar thrum of departure vibrated through the deck, a low hum of beginning. After stowing my meager belongings, a desire to witness our unmooring drew me towards the observation deck. It was there my gaze first snagged on him. A man etched with the harsh lines of his 40s, hair shorn close to the scalp, a permanent scowl carved into his features. He stood sentinel near the railing, his eyes conducting a methodical sweep of the passengers, an appraisal that prickled my skin. But the anomaly beneath his jacket arrested my attention. That distinct, lethal contour. A handgun. My heart kicked against my ribs. An illusion. Wishful thinking. Who transports weaponry on a passenger ferry? I wrestled with denial, conjuring prosaic explanations. A bulky phone, an overstuffed wallet. Yet a deeper instinct, cold and certain, knew the truth. My scrutiny must have been palpable, for his head snapped towards me, his eyes flinty, devoid of warmth, locking onto mine. A shared moment stretched, taut and silent. Then a smile flickered across his lips, a glacial gesture that never reached his eyes, before he pivoted away. I retreated, seeking the anonymous sanctuary of my cabin, thoughts tumbling like dice. Report it. But the specter of error, of inciting baseless alarm, stayed my hand. I resolved to remain vigilant, a silent observer, intervening only if further suspicion warranted. Night descended like a shroud, and with it, the storm's true fury. The ferry, a valiant beast, groaned and shuddered, battling waves that rose like liquid monoliths. Most passengers sought refuge in cabins or the main lounge, huddled against the percussive assault of wind and rain on the outer decks. Sleep proved elusive, restlessness propelling me towards the lounge. It was perhaps half occupied, figures lost in books, quiet conversations murmured over the storm's roar. others attempting sleep in the plush chairs. Procuring coffee from the small cafe, I claimed a seat by a window, mesmerized by the chaotic ballet of the sea. And then I saw them. The scowling man, no longer solitary but flanked by two shadows, equally grim. They were clustered in a corner, heads bowed, their conversation a low, urgent thrum beneath the storm's symphony. As I watched, transfixed, a small object passed between them. It resembled a key card, the kind granting access to the vessel's restricted arteries. A tremor, colder than the sea spray, traced my spine. This was no accidental convergence. Their purpose, whatever it entailed, bore the unmistakable scent of malice. My mind grappled for a course of action when the lounge's ambient murmur fractured. Near the entrance, a woman confronted a crew member, her voice escalating into near hysteria. "You don't grasp the danger," she pleaded, desperation fraying her words. "They mean to kill us. All of us." The crewman attempted placation, his words swallowed by her rising terror. "There's a bomb," she shrieked, the accusation hanging heavy in the suddenly silent room. "We're condemned." Chaos detonated. Bodies surged towards the exits, a tide of panic washing over the lounge. In this maelstrom, the trio I'd been observing moved with chilling purpose. They slipped through a side door, one I instinctively knew led beyond public access, vanishing into the ship's hidden passages. A precipice of decision loomed. Join the frantic exodus? Seek out authority? Try to articulate the fragmented pieces I possessed? A chilling premonition whispered that by the time my fears were validated, the die would be cast. Drawing a breath that felt thin and inadequate, I slipped through the same forbidden door. The corridor beyond was narrow, bathed in the weak glow of emergency lighting. Footsteps echoed faintly ahead. I shadowed them, striving for silence, my own heartbeat a frantic drum against the ship's metallic groans. Downward we plunged through a labyrinth of service ways, deeper into the vessel's mechanical heart. They halted before a heavy steel door stenciled "Engine Room." A swift swipe of the captured keycard, and they were absorbed within. I crept forward, pressing my ear against the cold metal. Their voices, muffled by the door and the omnipresent thrum of machinery, filtered through. Fragments, sharp and terrifying. Timer engaged. Confirmed. 30 minutes. Excellent. Positions us perfectly mid-channel. Maximum effect. The woman's frantic cries resonated with sudden, horrifying clarity. A bomb. Not a delusion, but a deadly reality. These men intended to shatter this vessel, to send hundreds plummeting into the storm-tossed abyss. Action was imperative. But what action? I was Elias Vance, a consultant, not a commando. Unarmed, untrained, utterly out of my depth. My only assets, the element of surprise, and the stark realization that inaction equaled mass murder. Steeling myself, I shoved the heavy door inward and stepped across the threshold. The engine room assaulted my senses, a cavernous vault dominated by colossal, vibrating machinery. The noise was a physical force, the air thick with heat and the acrid tang of oil. It took a moment to locate them amidst the mechanical behemoths. They were gathered on the far side, intently focused on an object. Closer I crept, using the engines as cover, until their handiwork came into view. A complex device bristling with wires, adorned with the sinister pulse of blinking lights. The bomb. One of them straightened, wiping greasy hands on his trousers. Armed and ready. Time to evacuate. Now. Or never. My eyes darted wildly, seeking an equalizer. A large wrench hanging heavy and potent on a nearby bulkhead answered my plea. Its weight felt solid, purposeful in my grasp. As they turned to depart, I emerged from the shadows. "Hold it right there!" The voice that boomed out felt borrowed, imbued with a bravado I desperately feigned. They spun, surprise hardening swiftly into feral anger. The scowling man, the genesis of my dread, clawed at his waistband. No time. I summoned every ounce of strength, launching the wrench in a flat arc. It struck him squarely in the chest, a sickening thud, staggering him backward. His pistol clattered onto the grated floor. His companion surged forward. I sidestepped the first attacker, but the second landed a brutal blow to my jaw. The coppery taste of blood flooded my mouth. What ensued was a desperate, ugly ballet of survival. Outnumbered, outmatched, yet fueled by a primal need to protect, not just myself, but everyone aboard. I landed blows, used the cramped, noisy environment to disrupt their coordination, but my stamina waned rapidly. A crushing headlock enveloped me. Fists hammered my ribs. Vision blurred at the edges. Then, a new sound pierced the cacophony. Shrill, insistent alarms screaming throughout the ship. My assailants froze. A shared curse spat between them. Someone had sounded the alert. Their momentary hesitation was my salvation. I tore free, scrambling, lunging for the fallen handgun. My fingers closed around the cool metal just as the man I'd felled with the wrench dove for me. We wrestled, a tangle of limbs on the slick, grimy floor. Dimly, I registered shouts from the corridor, the pounding rhythm of approaching feet. A final, convulsive surge of adrenaline, and the weapon was mine. Pure reflex guided my finger. The gunshot exploded, deafening in the enclosed space. My attacker recoiled, clutching a bleeding shoulder. His remaining Confederates raised their hands, defeat stark in their eyes. Seconds later, the engine room swarmed. Crew, security personnel, their faces etched with disbelief as they absorbed the scene. 3 subdued saboteurs, the bomb winking its malevolent countdown. And me. Elias Vance, bloodied, trembling, the gun still hot in my hand. The subsequent hours unfolded in a surreal haze. Bomb disposal experts rendered the device inert. The ferry diverted, limping towards the nearest port under escort. Statements were taken. Injuries tended to. I learned the distraught woman in the lounge had indeed overheard fragments of their plan, her panic inadvertently triggering the ship-wide alarm, though her message had been garbled, unclear. As dawn painted the sky in hues of bruised purple and fragile gold, I stood on the deck, watching the coastline solidify. The storm had retreated, leaving the air scoured clean, the heavens luminous. Fellow passengers approached intermittently, their words of gratitude, handshakes, and pats on the back feeling distant, unreal. The night's events still echoed within me, a dissonant chord. A Coast Guard officer materialized beside me, proffering a satellite phone. "Mr. Vance, call for you. The governor wishes to express his personal thanks." I nodded, accepting the phone, but as I lifted it, my gaze drifted towards the vast expanse where sea met sky. In that quiet moment, I knew some tectonic plate had shifted deep within my core. I had stared into the abyss and refused to blink. I had acted. Lives were preserved. The ferry crossing, intended as mere conveyance, had become a crucible, revealing strata of courage I never suspected lay dormant within. It underscored the extraordinary resilience that can surface in the most ordinary of souls when necessity demands. Bringing the phone to my ear, preparing to speak with the governor, I felt an unfamiliar certainty settle within me. Whatever currents life might steer my way henceforth, I would navigate them with a strength forged in the heart of chaos. For sometimes, improbable heroes are not born, but tempered, rising to confront perils they never sought, simply because they must. A susurrus through the decaying halls of Blackwood Sanatorium. That was the instant oblivion claimed my former life. What began as a pilgrimage into dereliction, a photographer's quest for the sublime wrought, curdled into a waking dread that clings to me still. My name is Elias, or was. Ruin lust, they call it. This compulsion to slip between the ribs of forgotten structures, to document the elegant surrender of steel and plaster. I'd courted the ghosts of countless abandoned places, but Blackwood was a different beast entirely. For over a decade, the sanatorium had festered on the city's fringe, a sprawling monument to obsolescence. It was the Everest of urban decay. 5 tiers of crumbling wards, spectral operating theaters, and shadowed recesses promising untold histories. Months I'd plotted this infiltration, awaiting the cloak of a new moon. Penetrating Blackwood was disarmingly simple, a splintered plank yielding beside a ground floor window, and the threshold was crossed. The air hung heavy, a tapestry woven from dust motes, the ghost of antiseptic, and something else, something rankly organic. My flashlight's beams sliced through the oppressive dark, illuminating peels of paint like sunburned skin and the skeletal remains of medical apparatus. That first hour unfolded like a fever dream fulfilled. My lens captured an old nursery, its observation window miraculously intact, vacant cribs standing sentinel in the gloom. In a disheveled office, patient histories lay strewn like fallen leaves, their paper disintegrating beneath my cautious touch. The cafeteria held a spectral stillness, trays stacked in silent anticipation of phantom meals. It was on the 3rd floor, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of what appeared to be the former psychiatric wing, that the silence began to fray. A phantom murmur, the building settling into its grave. No. Then, undeniably, voices. A man's clipped tones, a woman's strained reply. Locked in discordant exchange from somewhere higher still, somewhere above my head. I froze, a statue carved from sudden ice, my pulse hammering against my ribs. This wasn't wind. This wasn't imagination. Every rational fiber screamed retreat, urged me back towards the fragile safety of the outside world. Yet the siren call of the unknown, the explorer's fatal flaw, drew me upward. Each step on the groaning staircase felt like a betrayal of self-preservation. the ancient wood complaining loudly beneath my weight. The voices sharpened, grew louder as I ascended to the fourth floor. They emanated from behind imposing double doors, the faded lettering identifying the surgical suite. Pressing my ear to the cold, unforgiving metal, their words finally crystallized, etching themselves into my memory. This cannot continue, Marcus. The woman's voice, tight as wire. Discovery is inevitable. Someone will notice. His response dripped with a chilling nonchalance. Relax, Clara. This carcass has served us well. Months, undisturbed. No one ventures here. But if someone does, if they stumble upon... They become part of the silence, he interrupted, the finality absolute, colder than the steel beneath my ear. A tremor of revulsion, icy and profound, sent me reeling back. My elbow struck a forgotten surgical tray perched precariously on a skeletal gurney nearby. The clangor wasn't merely loud, it was a sacrilege against the tomb-like quiet, echoing, amplifying, seeming to shatter the very air within the vast structure. Abrupt silence from beyond the door. Then, the scrape of chairs on linoleum, the unmistakable thud of urgent, heavy footfalls moving towards the doors, towards me. Panic, pure and primal, detonated within my chest. Pure, adrenalized flight consumed me. I sprinted, no longer caring about stealth, down corridors blurring into streaks of decay. Behind me, the double doors crashed open. Hey! You! Stop! Faster than I knew possible, I plunged down the stairs, taking them in twos and threes, the sound of pursuit echoing terrifyingly close. Rounding a bend on the second floor, a hand snagged my worn canvas jacket, a tearing sound, fabric yielding, a desperate wrench free. I burst back through the violated window frame, tumbling onto the overgrown, neglected lawn. My battered sedan lay hidden amongst skeletal trees a block away. I reached it, breath tearing at my lungs, keys fumbling in trembling hands as shouts echoed from the sanatorium's direction. As the engine caught and I fishtailed away from the curb, a backward glance in the mirror seared an image onto my brain. Two silhouettes stark against the sanatorium's gaping maw. A flicker of moonlight caught polished steel in the man's grasp. A gun. Hours blurred into an eternity of highway hypnosis. Terror, my co-pilot. Every pair of headlights blooming in my rearview mirror sent jolts of adrenaline through my system. Only the pale dawn creeping over the horizon granted me the courage to pull into a desolate rest stop, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I killed the engine. What infernal enterprise had I blundered into? Narcotics. Something darker. Trafficking in secrets best left buried. Whatever it was, I was drowning, far out of my depth. The police. The thought flickered and died. Confessed to trespassing in a condemned asylum, babbling about overheard whispers and shadowy figures. And the man's confidence? Months, undisturbed. Hinted at precautions, perhaps even connections. No, authority felt like another potential trap. I opted for invisibility. I called in sick to the life I once knew, transforming my small apartment into a self-imposed prison, trying to rationalize away the danger, clinging to the hope they hadn't seen my face, my car. But the quiet offered no solace. A creeping wrongness settled in. Objects subtly shifted position while I was out. Digital ghosts flickered across my computer screen. Files accessed, histories disturbed. Twice, the unnerving certainty of being watched, of the same nondescript sedan mirroring my route to the grocery store, prickled the back of my neck. Paranoia, once a whisper, became a suffocating roar. Sleep offered no refuge, only fractured replays of the chase through Blackwood's decaying veins. Friends' calls went unanswered. The digital world felt like a web waiting to ensnare me. A week simmered past in this purgatory. Then, home. The apartment door pushed slightly inward, unlatched, a violation screaming silently from the threshold. Inside, chaos reigned. Not the random violence of burglary, but a deliberate, invasive search. Drawers disgorged their contents, furniture brutalized, cushions slashed. Yet nothing tangible appeared missing. And there, stark against the scarred wood grain of my kitchen table, lay a single sheet of paper. On it, penned in precise, chilling script. "We see you, Elias. We know this place. Silence is your only sanctuary. Next time, we won't be so gentle." That note shattered the last vestiges of my old reality. Flight wasn't a choice. It was instinct. A frantic purge. Essential clothes crammed into a duffel bag. My bank account drained of its meager contents like lifeblood. The open road swallowing me whole. Digital umbilical cords severed. Phone, credit cards, online history. Abandoned at the altar of anonymity. Miles bled into days, each sunrise finding me further adrift. Now, 3 months have passed. I exist in this nameless town, thousands of miles from the life I inadvertently destroyed, washing dishes in a greasy spoon under a fabricated name. My hair is dyed an unfamiliar shade. A beard scratches at skin that no longer feels like my own. Yet safety remains an illusion, a phantom limb. Every unfamiliar face scanning the diner counter, every car idling too long outside, sends splinters of ice down my spine. Nightmares resurrect Blackwood's corridors with horrifying fidelity. The urge to confess, to seek sanctuary with faceless authorities like the FBI, wars constantly with the primal need to remain invisible, to keep running. The thrill of decay, the romance of ruins, ashes in my mouth now, tasteless and bitter. Those forgotten corners harbor more than dust and memories. They conceal active threats. I know this fugitive existence cannot last. Eventually, the past will corner me. Perhaps then I will speak. But for now, I keep moving, keep glancing over my shoulder. Let this chronicle stand as testament. The true phantoms haunting derelict spaces are not spectral echoes of the past, but the flesh and blood predators guarding their secrets in the present. To anyone drawn to the allure of the abandoned, remember my story. Remember that some thresholds should remain uncrossed, some silences undisturbed, because the price for violating them can be everything you are, everything you ever hoped to be. The real ghosts are the ones who carry guns and leave warnings on your kitchen table. The phone's insistent bleat sliced through the Tuesday morning quiet at 17 minutes to 9. Anya Petrova, 4B. Again. Her voice, stretched thin and brittle across the line, wove the familiar narrative of basement seepage. this time amplified with tales of sodden heirlooms and puddles manifesting overnight where none should bloom. Her third summons this month regarding the persistent damp. Groundwater, most likely, I mused. The usual infiltration through the tired bones of Building 4's foundation. My toolbox rattled familiarly as I hefted it and stepped out of the maintenance office. My breath ghosted white in the raw morning air blanketing the parking lot. Fallen leaves lay plastered to the walkways, slick and dark like old wounds. Building 4, a stoic brick relic from the 60s, seemed to hunch lower against the chill, its subterranean storage units. Infamous repositories of perpetual moisture. Ms. Petrova herself materialized at her doorway, a figure etched in worry, clad in a quilted blue robe. Silver hair strayed wildly around a face drawn taut, her knuckles showing white where they clenched a ceramic mug. "It's moved beyond mere dampness, Silas," she uttered, her gaze flicking nervously past me. "Down there. Things are disturbed, not how I arranged them." At the head of the basement stairwell, my hand found the switch. A trio of stutters from the ancient fluorescent tubes overhead, then a harsh, unwavering illumination flooded the descent, painting every imperfection in stark relief. A current of air coiled up to meet me, colder than the October morning warranted, carrying an unfamiliar odor, not the expected earthy must, but something sharper, the metallic tang of stagnant pond water mingled with rust. My work boots beat a hollow tattoo on the groaning wooden treads. Down in the concrete vastness below, the echo of my steps seemed peculiar, refracting strangely, as if the very dimensions of the chamber had subtly warped. Ms. Petrova's storage cage occupied the far corner. I approached the wire mesh, noting the undisturbed gleam of the brass padlock. Inside, however, lay a scene of quiet, impossible disruption. Her old armchair, swaddled in protective plastic that crackled faintly, teetered atop a precarious stack of 3 cardboard boxes, canted at an angle that defied simple physics. Beside it, her tall wooden bookshelf stood inverted, yet its cargo of paperbacks remained resolutely in place, adhering to the upside-down shelves as if glued. "Do you see?" Her voice, suddenly close, startled me. I hadn't sensed her following me down the stairs. Yesterday evening, everything was orderly. I swear I haven't touched a thing. My attention snagged on something else within the cage. A perfect circle of water, about 2 feet in diameter, shimmering on the concrete floor. No dripping pipe marred the ceiling above. The surrounding concrete was utterly dry. I thumbed the padlock open and pushed the wire door inward. The water in the pool was clear but seemed unnervingly deep. My flashlight beam penetrated it without finding any bottom. A few paces away lay another identical pool, and another beyond that, forming a sequence, a pattern that felt subtly wrong, inducing a faint dizziness when I tried to follow it. "Oh, when did you first notice this?" I kept my voice even, professional. "Near 6 this morning," she whispered, clutching the mug to her chest as if for warmth. "I came down to retrieve some winter clothes, and the furniture was arranged like this. There was only the one puddle then. But Silas, they continue to appear. I've been watching. Roughly every hour, another one simply emerges." I knelt beside the nearest circle, instinctively reaching out with my voltage tester. Nothing. Hesitantly, I touched the water's surface with a fingertip. It was intensely cold, but possessed a strange density, a viscosity akin to mercury. When I withdrew my finger, it came away completely dry, unmarked by moisture. The sound of dripping water seemed louder now, yet its source remained elusive, emanating from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the walls themselves were weeping. I stood, studying the bizarre tableau of the furniture again. The armchair, by all rights, should have tumbled. It remained frozen in its impossible balancing act. I ought to check the neighboring units, I murmured, mostly to myself. See if anyone else has reported issues. I moved the cage beside Ms. Petrova's, Mr. Gian's, if memory served. The padlock yielded with suspicious ease, clicking open before my key made contact. The interior was starkly vacant, save for a single, plain wooden chair positioned in the exact center, facing the damp rear wall. I distinctly recalled Jean stacking boxes high in this very unit just the previous week. As I contemplated the empty space, the dripping noise swelled. Directly in front of my boots, the concrete seemed to perspire, then bulge slightly upwards, birthing another perfect dark circle of water. Its surface tension held for a taut moment, like a blister forming from beneath the solid floor. Ms. Petrova, I began, turning back towards the stairs. I need you to go upstairs immediately. Call the property manager. Tell him we require plumbers. Emphasize plural. I'll stay here and investigate further. She was gone. Where the staircase had been moments before, there was now only a flat, unbroken expanse of concrete wall. The overhead lights flickered violently. In the momentary blackness, I heard a definite splash from one of the puddles. When the fluorescence stuttered back to life, the wooden chair in Gian's unit had swiveled. It now faced me. Droplets clung to its seat, yet they defied gravity, creeping upwards to vanish against the ceiling. I backed away instinctively, pressing myself against the featureless wall where the exit should have been. My flashlight beam, sweeping erratically, caught a subtle movement within Petrova's cage. The armchair quivered, adjusting its impossible equilibrium. From the inverted bookshelf, a paperback slid silently outwards and hung suspended in the stagnant air. A penetrating cold seeped into the basement, stealing the breath from my lungs, each exhalation condensing into a thick, white plume. Frost began to bloom along the concrete edges of the puddles, yet the dark water within remained liquid, swirling with slow, deliberate, internal currents. The ubiquitous dripping had coalesced into a rhythm, a heavy, measured beat like a colossal heart pulsing somewhere deep beneath my feet. Reaching the dead end where the stairs had ascended, I pressed my palms flat against the concrete. It felt strangely yielding, almost pliable, like cold, damp flesh. My fingers left shallow impressions that slowly filled with weeping moisture. The wall beneath my touch seemed to throb with a faint, terrifying pulse. A sharp crack echoed through the chamber, like snapping bone. I spun around. The wire mesh of the storage cages began to buckle and distort, metal bars bending at impossible angles, as if crushed by an unseen weight. Water erupted from every joint and seam, not falling, but streaming sideways and upwards, weaving intricate, luminous geometric figures in the air. Ms. Petrova's armchair lifted serenely from its its precarious pile of boxes, drifting like a dead leaf on an invisible current. The plastic sheeting covering it rippled and slithered away, revealing upholstery that seemed to move, to writhe with a subtle, subcutaneous life. The pattern resolved itself, not florals, but a dense tapestry of miniature, agonized faces, their mouths stretched wide in silent screams. My flashlight flickered and died. A heartbeat later, the fluorescent lights overhead followed suit, plunging the basement into absolute, impenetrable darkness. In the sudden void, I heard something large displacing water, the splashing sounds seeming to come from all directions, surrounding me. Then came the distinct grating scrape of heavy furniture being dragged across concrete, punctuated by the groaning creak of stressed wooden joints. My hands, slick with cold sweat, fumbled desperately for my phone. Its screen flared to life, casting a frail circle of blue light that barely pushed back the oppressive gloom. It illuminated the floor directly beneath me, no longer flat concrete, but something with the texture of stretched hide, rising and falling in slow, shallow breaths. The scraping sounds intensified, closing in. My inadequate light caught fleeting glimpses, the curve of a chair leg, the sharp corner of a tabletop, the spine of a hovering book. The furniture, animated by some alien volition, was forming a constricting circle around me. Water now sheeted the walls and ceiling, flowing in complex non-Euclidean patterns that twisted the senses. I stumbled backwards until my shoulders hit the yielding, pulsing wall. The phone screen began to flicker erratically, a dying strobe. In its intermittent flashes, I saw the armchair drift closer, the tiny faces embedded in its fabric turning, tracking my presence. Behind it, other shapes rose into the air. Tables, boxes, bookshelves, all warped into unnatural configurations, all moving with a palpable, dreadful purpose. Then, the screen went black, complete void. Something cold and wet touched my shoulder. It had the texture of fingers, but far too many, jointed in ways that felt hideously wrong. The sound of dripping had escalated into a deafening roar, drowning out my own panicked, ragged breathing. And then, light, harsh, sudden, absolute. I was standing at the bottom of the basement stairs, blinking against the familiar fluorescent glare. Anya Petrova stood at the top landing, her hand still resting on the light switch, the ubiquitous coffee mug clutched in her other hand. "Did you find anything?" she called down, her voice thin with anxiety. "The source of the water." My eyes swept the basement. It looked normal. Storage cages stood in neat rows. Furniture rested solidly on the dry concrete floor. Everything was mundane, ordinary. Except, inside Ms. Petrova's unit, the armchair was no longer perched on the boxes. It sat squarely on the floor, facing the wire mesh door, and spread across its seat cushion, stark against the fabric, was a dark, damp stain in the unmistakable shape of a human handprint. "Call a plumber," I managed, my voice sounding unnaturally steady in my own ears. "Actually, call several. Don't you come down here again, Miss Petrova. Do you understand? Not alone. Not ever." I mounted the stairs swiftly, fighting the urge to break into a run. At the top, I pulled the heavy fire door shut, ramming the bolt home. Through the thick wood, I could almost hear the dripping begin anew, a subtle, rhythmic pattern that seemed to hover on the edge of intelligibility. Miss Petrova was already talking about insurance adjusters and deductible limits, but her words were a distant buzz. My keys chattered violently in my shaking hand as I strode towards the building's exit. 15 other maintenance calls populated my work list for the day. They would go unaddressed. I drove directly to the property manager's office and laid my keys on his desk. "I quit," I said, turning and walking out before he could form a question, leaving him staring after me. In my car's rearview mirror, Building 4 diminished as I drove away. Just before I turned the corner, I thought I saw a flicker of movement in the grimy basement window nearest Ms. Petrova's apartment. A surge of darkness flowing upwards, like water defying gravity. Or perhaps it was just a shadow. 3 days later, a small article in the local paper detailed the sudden evacuation of Building 4, citing critical structural concerns, anomalous basement saturation, and unexplained phenomena resistant to engineering analysis. Anya Petrova was briefly quoted regarding disarranged furniture and unsettling subterranean sounds. The building was swiftly condemned and demolished. The demolition crew itself reportedly walked off the job midway, plagued by persistent equipment malfunctions and the baffling reappearance of water puddles within sealed-off sections. They ultimately entombed the basement foundation in concrete, pouring nearly twice the expected volume before the gray slurry finally ceased to be swallowed by the earth below. Sometimes late at night, my route inadvertently takes me past the lot where Building 4 once stood. It's just a flat, empty expanse of concrete now, surrounded by chain-link fencing and warning signs. But after a heavy rain, puddles form on its surface. Perfect, dark circles of water, arranged in unnatural patterns that obey no law of drainage or terrain. I never slow down when I pass. I don't allow my gaze to linger on those unsettling, glassy pools. And on quiet nights, I absolutely do not pause to listen for the faint, persistent sound of dripping water, emanating from a place where no water ought to be. I've held other maintenance jobs since then, in newer, drier buildings, but I scrutinize every contract now, and any work order that mentions water in a basement. That call goes straight to voicemail. The attic demanded sacrifice, a penance I'd deferred for months. Clara, my wife, her patience finally frayed to a single, trembling thread, had delivered the ultimatum last weekend. Clear the accumulated strata of 30 years, or she walked. So I ascended, swallowed by the dust-choked throat of the house, sneezing particulates of forgotten time. Cardboard sarcophagi crumbled at a touch, releasing the sour breath of mildew. A fine gray silt settled on my hands, my face, a powdery shroud. Gossamer filaments of arachnid silk clung with unnerving intimacy. Above, a naked bulb spat harsh, angular shadows across the slanted rafters, distorting the familiar into the vaguely menacing. My spine screamed from the prolonged crouch, 3 hours deep in this archaeological dig through our own lives. Most of it a tide of obsolete magazines, fractured Christmas baubles, and moth-ravaged textiles flowed directly into black refuse sacks. A scant few relics earned a reprieve, set aside for sentiment's sake. Then, nestled in a far corner, anomalous, a chest of dark, grained wood, bound with tarnished brass. No memory surfaced of its placement. Clara's, perhaps, from the era preceding us. My touch left stark handprints in the thick dust coating its lid. The latch yielded with a soft, permissive click. Within, swaddled in brittle, tea-stained tissue, lay a music box. Diminutive, perhaps 4 inches square, its wooden shell intricately carved, darkened by generations of touch. The lacquer was worn smooth at the corners, revealing the pale wood beneath. A sudden constriction seized my throat. Recognition, cold and sharp. My grandmother's gift, bestowed upon my 8-year-old self, vanished during the chaotic migration of '92. Father's fury had been volcanic. It was an heirloom, a lineage marker. My fingers trembled as I inverted it. The brass winding key, dulled to near blackness, protruded from the base. A fool's errand to wind it, the mechanism surely seized with rust and time. Yet, compulsion overruled caution. The key grated stiffly in its socket. 1 turn, 2, 3 strained revolutions. The lid snapped open. Where a delicate ballerina once pirouetted, only a naked brass spindle remained. The first notes emerged, hesitant, stumbling like a dying breath. Not the melody etched in memory. This was alien. Green Sleeves. That was its song, I was certain. This emergent tune twisted, dissonant and unsettling, notes snagging, dragging. An icy prickle traced my skin. The air grew perceptibly colder. The bare bulb overhead flickered, threatening darkness. Yet the melody persisted, gathering an improbable strength. The notes sharpened, coalescing into a pattern that resonated with a primal, buried disquiet. Something ancient, vaguely threatening. It tugged at submerged strata of my mind, surfacing phantom recollections not my own. Moon-drenched stone circles beneath starless voids, robed figures chanting in tongues archaic before Rome's founding. My fingers scrabbled to close the lid. It resisted, locked open by an unseen force. The music swelled, invasive. My limbs refused my command. The melody coiled around my consciousness like freezing ivy. Footfalls ascended the attic stairs. Clara's voice muffled by the floorboards. "Elias, how's it progressing up there?" A desperate urge to warn her, to scream, "Stay away," warred with my paralyzed throat. The trapdoor groaned upwards. Clara's head emerged. "Made any headway? I brought you some." Her words died. Her gaze fixed first on my face, then dropped to the music box cradled in my hands. Her eyes dilated. Where did you find that?" Her voice was a thin, shaking reed. "That isn't... It can't be." The melody spiraled to a shrieking crescendo. Notes impossible for such a simple clockwork device. Notes that bored into my skull like glacial drills. Clara recoiled. "No, no. Elias, put it down. Put it down now." Still immobile, mute, a prisoner in my own skin. The music saturated the attic, drowning thought. Clara lunged, her hands striking out, attempting to bat the box from my grasp. Her fingertips grazed the age-darkened wood. Instantaneously, the music ceased. Silence crashed down. Absolute. Profound. Even the distant hum of street traffic vanished. The light bulb winked out. Darkness. Then, a sound. Soft, chitinous scraping. The cloying odor of damp earth and something long decayed filled the air. Clara's flashlight beam sliced through the black, finding the music box still locked in my grip. The brass spindle, the ballerina's vacant stage, was moving, twitching, elongating. A dark, viscous fluid seeped from the mechanism's heart, thick droplets spattering my hands. They burned, corrosive as acid. Still, I could not release my hold. The form emerging transcended any notion of a dancer. Long, multi-jointed limbs unfolded, impossibly compressed within the tiny cavity. How much of it was contained within? How could it continue to unfurl? Clara screamed. The flashlight beam danced hysterically, illuminating fragmented glimpses of something fundamentally wrong, an architecture that defied Euclidean space, that inflicted pain upon the optic nerve. Beneath my skin, where the ichor had touched, I felt a sickening stir, a burrowing sensation spreading up my arms. Clara scrambled for the trapdoor, her foot catching on a box. She tumbled, the flashlight spinning away, swallowed by the oppressive dark. The entity from the box was fully manifest now, a chaotic mass of shifting segments and illogical angles that seemed to consume the attic's volume. It flowed towards Clara. She scrabbled backward, whimpering, colliding with the far wall. A surge of adrenaline, of pure terror, warred against the paralysis. Muscles screamed with the strain. Capillaries burst in my eyes. The invisible bonds shattered. I surged forward, the music box still fused to my burning palms. Clara, the trapdoor. Go. No hesitation. She rolled, found the ladder, and scrambled down, her footsteps hammering frantically on the stairs below. The entity pivoted, its impossible geometry rippling as it focused its attention, whatever passed for attention, on me. My mind buckled, struggling to reconcile the visual input with reality. One desperate act remained. I slammed the music box lid shut. A shriek tore through the attic, a sound that ruptured my eardrums, sending warm blood trickling. The entity recoiled, imploding back into the box like smoke sucked down a chimney, folding, compressing, vanishing. The lid clicked firmly shut. The winding key ceased its slow rotation. I stood trembling in the absolute darkness. Blood dripped from my nose, my ears. My hands were a mass of weeping blisters. Clara's voice drifted up from the safety below. Elias. Elias, are you all right? Stay down! My voice was a ragged rasp. Don't come back up! I have to finish this. Destroy it before it could open again. In the corner, the relic of a coal furnace squatted, unused for decades, yet structurally sound. My hands, slick with blood and serum, fumbled with the rusted firebox door. Cobwebs and dust filled the cavity. I placed the music box inside, slammed the door, fumbled for the emergency matches. The first snapped. The second flared. I fed it paper, splintered cardboard, until flames licked greedily. The heat intensified with unnatural speed. The furnace's cast iron skin beginning to glow cherry red. From within the firebox, something screamed, not the alien shriek from before. This was infinitely worse. A child's voice. My voice, decades younger, pleading, begging. Please don't. I'll be good, I promise. Don't burn me. I clamped my blistered hands over my ears. Not real. Not real. Other voices joined the chorus. My grandmother, my father, Clara, all screaming in simulated agony. The furnace shuddered violently, the door straining against its latch as if something immense pushed from within. Black, greasy smoke poured from every seam, thick with the stench of rendered fat and something far older, something foully subterranean. The voices reached an impossible, flensing pitch. The furnace glowed white hot, and then silence. The incandescence faded. An hour I waited, listening to the settling clicks of cooling metal, before daring to open the door. Inside, only fine gray ash and warped, heat-twisted metal fragments. No trace of wood, no hint of brass. My hands throbbed, an agonizing burn. Later, under the harsh glare of a utility light, I saw them. Thin, dark lines beneath the blistered skin, branching like insidious roots, spreading. Clara refuses to set foot on the attic stairs again. We seal the trap door, postponing the remainder of the purge indefinitely. But my hands continue their subtle metamorphosis. The subcutaneous lines creep further each day. And at night, just at the threshold of hearing, I perceive it, that melody, discordant and ancient. It resides within me now, a seed of dissonance, growing, waiting. Sometimes I see Clara watching me, her eyes tracking the subtle shifts, the way my joints seem to bend at slightly unnatural angles, the geometry of my shadow not quite conforming to the light. Soon, the music will achieve its full resonance. The transformation will reach its apotheosis, and then I hear it now, swelling faintly. My fingers twitch, keeping time with notes only I can perceive. It won't be long. Puestib. This narrative was recovered from Elias Thorne's personal computer. He and his wife, Clara Thorne, vanished approximately 3 weeks prior to its discovery. The attic of their residence showed signs of an intense fire, its origin undetermined. Investigators found no remnants of a music box, nor any antique furnace. Neighbors attested the space had been empty for years. The sole piece of physical evidence consisted of peculiar markings seared onto the attic floorboards, intricate curving lines and symbols. Analysis indicated a form of musical notation, though no musicologist consulted could identify its style or era. Attempts to transcribe or perform the recovered melody have reportedly coincided with the subsequent disappearances of those involved. It began subtly, the delicate snick of a camera's mechanism, lost almost entirely to the sigh of the waves. By the 100th such sound, however, the illusion of innocence had evaporated, leaving behind the cold certainty of peril. What had commenced as a much-needed respite by the sea, the simple coastal sojourn, transmuted with horrifying speed into a desperate gambit of pursuit and evasion, orchestrated by a stranger who seemed unnervingly attuned to my every attention. Never could I have conceived that sun-drenched shores and salt-laced air would become the backdrop for a descent into a nightmare, one that would fray the edges of my security, my very sanity. My name is Ilara. For months, this escape to the coast had shimmered like a distant oasis on the horizon of my demanding life. As a barrister tethered to the city's relentless churn, time off was a rare indulgence, wrested from me only by the persistent urging of friends. Thus, I found myself in a tranquil seaside town, the initial days unfolding in a blissful rhythm, languid mornings spent cocooned in sleep, afternoons devoted to literature upon the warm expanse of sand, evenings punctuated by the slow descent of the sun, observed with a glass of chilled wine. The shift occurred on the 4th day. I lay sprawled on my towel, absorbing the sun's generous warmth, when that distinct mechanical whisper reached my ears again. My eyes flickered open, scanning the beach. There he was, a man lowering a camera, its lens long and professional. He was nondescript, of average build, clad in the ubiquitous tourist armor of khaki shorts and a navy polo shirt. Ordinarily unremarkable. But then our gazes locked, and an inexplicable tremor ran through me, a chill defying the midday heat. Something in his stare, a focused intensity, ignited an immediate sense of profound unease. He offered a smile, a mere curving of lips that failed utterly to ignite his eyes, before turning and meandering away down the shoreline. People take pictures at the beach all the time, I reasoned, attempting to quell the rising disquiet. It signifies nothing. Yet the reassurance felt hollow, and soon I found myself gathering my belongings, retreating to the sanctuary of my rented cottage far earlier than planned. The following day, seeking distraction, I ventured into the heart of the small town. While peering into the quaint display of a boutique, a flash of familiar navy blue captured my attention in the window's reflection. A frantic drumbeat commenced against my ribs. I spun around, but the narrow street bustled with oblivious tourists. If he had been there, observing me, he had already melted back into the crowd. Seeking refuge, I slipped into a small cafe, needing a moment to steady my galloping thoughts. Over a steaming latte, I berated myself for succumbing to paranoia, for conjuring menace from thin air. This was meant to be restorative, not a descent into suspicion. An hour later, however, emerging from the cafe's calm, I saw him again. Positioned directly across the street, his camera was unequivocally aimed at me. The shutter clicked, an audible punctuation mark to his presence. He lowered the device, that same vacant, unnerving smile fixed upon his face. Without a backward glance, I hurried towards my cottage, my fingers trembling as I fumbled with the lock, securing the door firmly behind me. This transcended coincidence. He was tracking me, documenting my movements, and the reason remained terrifyingly obscure. Sleep that night was a fragmented, restless affair. Every nocturnal creak of the old cottage, every rustle in the wind-stirred foliage outside my window, amplified into the imagined sounds of his presence, convinced he was lurking just beyond the glass, watching. By dawn, I was afraid nerve-ending, hypersensitive and skittish. Forsaking the beach, I drove inland towards a nearby hiking trail, desperate for the cleansing anonymity of nature, the solace of physical exertion. The ascent helped. The rhythm of my steps and the wild beauty surrounding me began to soothe the ragged edges of my anxiety. For several precious hours, the man with the camera almost faded from my thoughts. Then, rounding a sharp bend in the path, I saw him. He stood poised on an overlook perhaps 100 yards distant, his camera leveled directly at my position. I froze, a surge of pure adrenaline flooding my system. Impossible. How could he have anticipated my destination? How had he managed to precede me on this secluded trail? He lowered the camera and, with chilling deliberation, began walking towards me. Logic abandoned, instinct took command. I turned and fled, heedless of the path, driven solely by the primal urge to escape. Down the trail I plunged, low branches lashing at my face, my lungs searing with the effort. Behind me, I could hear his footfalls, steady, unhurried, imbued with a terrifying certainty of eventual capture. I erupted from the tree line into the sun-baked emptiness of the parking lot, my hands shaking violently as I wrestled with my car keys. As I wrenched the car into reverse and sped away, I caught a final glimpse of him emerging from the woods, camera still in hand, that cold, empty smile still haunting his features. My flight took me directly to the local constabulary. Trembling, I recounted the sequence of events to the uniformed officer behind the desk. He listened with practiced patience, yet skepticism clouded his gaze. "Ma'am," he began, his tone gentle but dismissive. "Taking photographs in public isn't illegal, unless this individual has made direct threats or attempted physical harm. Our hands are rather tied." I departed the station feeling utterly defeated, the weight of isolation pressing down harder than ever. I understood the perception, a jumpy tourist misinterpreting innocent actions, but a visceral certainty screamed otherwise. This man, this anonymous pursuer, intended harm. Back within the flimsy security of the cottage, I meticulously checked every lock, drawing the curtains tight against the encroaching twilight. Needing the anchor of a familiar voice, I called my closest friend back in the city. As I detailed the escalating harassment, her initial concern sharpened into alarm. "Alara, you have to leave," she insisted, her voice taut with urgency. "This isn't right. Come home. Immediately." Relief washed over me at her decisiveness, the prospect of returning to the known safety of my urban life. A sudden, powerful solace. I booked the earliest available flight for the following morning and began, with trembling hands, to pack. Night descended, amplifying the cottage's unfamiliar sounds, deepening the shadows in every corner. Each groan of the old structure sent a jolt through my system. Attempting distraction via the television proved futile. My focus fractured, my senses strained for any external noise. Around midnight, it came, a soft, metallic click, unnervingly close, originating from just outside my bedroom window. My blood turned to ice water, heart hammering against my ribs, with a force I was certain he could hear. I crept towards the window. Edging the curtain back by the barest fraction, I saw him. He stood cloaked in the deep shadows beneath the trees bordering the property. As I watched, paralyzed by terror, he raised his camera once more. The flash erupted, briefly illuminating his face, searing that cold, predatory smile into my memory. I recoiled from the window, snatching my phone to dial emergency services. But even as my finger hovered over the screen, a new sound intruded, chilling me to the bone. The slow, deliberate rotation of a key within the front door lock. How had he obtained a key? Had he violated this space before? A cascade of horrifying possibilities flooded my mind as I heard the distinct sound of the door opening, then closing with unnerving softness. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow, measured, drawing inexorably closer. My eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for anything, any object that might serve as a weapon. They landed on a heavy ceramic table lamp. Wrenching the cord from the wall, I gripped its base, positioning myself defensively beside the bedroom door. The footsteps paused directly outside. I held my breath, every muscle coiled, poised for confrontation. The doorknob began its slow, agonizing turn. As the door swung inward, I swung the lamp with every ounce of strength I possessed. A sickening thud reverberated, followed by a sharp cry of pain. I didn't linger to assess the damage. Bolting past the crumpled figure now sprawled in the doorway, I lunged for the front Behind me, I heard sounds of recovery, the resumption of pursuit. I burst out into the cool night air, the yielding sand of the beach impeding my flight. Instinctively, I headed towards the distant glow of the town lights, praying for witnesses, for intervention. Reaching the relative solidity of the boardwalk, I risked a backward glance. He was there, perhaps 50 feet behind, his camera bouncing against his chest as he ran. And in that moment, bathed in the jaundiced glare of the streetlights, his features sharpened into horrifying clarity. I recognized him. He was no stranger. He was Silas, a man whose conviction I had helped secure 5 years prior as a junior prosecutor. A man who had spat venomous promises of retribution as guards led him from the courtroom. The realization struck with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't random harassment. It was targeted vengeance. He had tracked me down, followed me to this supposed sanctuary, meticulously orchestrated this campaign of terror. Adrenaline surged anew. I ran harder, my lungs burning, legs turning to leaden weights. Shouts erupted nearby. People on the boardwalk had registered the chase. Then, a sound more beautiful than any symphony. The rising wail of a police siren. Silas must have heard it too. A harsh curse ripped through the night air. His pursuing footsteps faltered. When I dared look back again, he had vanished, swallowed by the dense shadows between the beachfront establishments. A patrol car screeched to a halt beside me, an officer leaping out, hand hovering near his weapon. "Ma'am, are you injured?" I collapsed onto the weathered planks of the boardwalk, the adrenaline deserting me in a dizzying rush. Between ragged gasps, I poured out the entire story. The photographs, the relentless stalking, and finally, the chilling revelation of his identity. They apprehended Silas an hour later as he attempted to board a late-night bus out of town. His camera yielded its chilling harvest. Hundreds of images of me, captured on the beach, navigating the town's streets, even peering unknowingly through the windows of my rented cottage. Alongside the photos, the police discovered detailed notes chronicling my daily routines and, most disturbingly, a small collection of personal trinkets that could only have originated from my apartment back in the city. The subsequent investigation revealed he'd been granted parole 6 months earlier. He had utilized that time with singular focus, plotting his revenge, monitoring my life from the periphery, awaiting the opportune moment. My seaside vacation had inadvertently provided it. I gave my formal statement, pressing charges for stalking, breaking and entering, and assault. Yet, even as Silas was led away, bound in handcuffs, the chilling finality I craved remained elusive. The look he directed at me as they placed him in the cruiser conveyed an unspoken, terrifying message. This ordeal was merely an interruption, not an ending. I flew home the following day, but the perceived safety of familiar surroundings offered little solace. The phantom sensation of being watched clung to me like a shroud. Every unexpected camera click, every sudden flash of light, sent jolts of panic through me. My apartment became a fortress, fortified with a state-of-the-art security system. Therapy sessions commenced, aimed at untangling the knots of anxiety and paranoia that now constricted my life. Months have bled into one another, and logic dictates my safety. Silas remains incarcerated, his sentence significantly extended. Yet sometimes navigating a crowded city street, or lying suspended in the stillness of the night, I hear it, or imagine I hear it, the faint, insidious snick of a camera shutter, and the question echoes, unanswered. Will the sanctuary of true peace ever be mine again? The void where headlights should have burned, that was the first tremor, the instant the ordinary shattered. By then, of course, the snare was set. A predatory ballet had commenced on the rain-slicked stage of the highway, and I, Elara, was its unwilling focus. It was Friday, the city receding behind me after a meeting that bled late into the evening. An hour out, the sky wept, a tentative mist thickening into a violent cascade that hammered the roof and blurred the world beyond my windshield. The road unspooled, a glistening black artery swallowed by the night. Usually, I found solace in these nocturnal journeys, the universe contracting to the hum of the engine, the sweep of the wipers, the solitary beam carving through darkness. Tonight, however, tranquility was supplanted by a crawling unease, a primal prickle at the base of my neck. 20 minutes it took for the shape to register fully in my periphery, a car trailing me, indistinct in the deluge, perhaps obsidian, perhaps the deepest marine blue. What arrested my attention, chillingly, was its utter lack of illumination. In this blinding downpour, driving sightless felt less careless than cosmically wrong. How could its pilot navigate the aqueous gloom? Initially, dismissal felt easy. Forgotten switch, faulty wiring. Surely awareness would dawn, lights would flare, or the vehicle would retreat to the shoulder. It did neither. The shadow car maintained its position, a measured few lengths back, near enough for its silhouette to haunt my rearview mirror, distant enough to obscure whoever or whatever held the wheel. A gentle pressure on the accelerator. I nudged my speed upward. The phantom echoed my increase, preserving the unnerving interval. I eased off, decelerating. It mirrored me precisely. The disquiet curdled into genuine fear. This wasn't navigation. It was pursuit. No sane driver behaves this way. Not in a tempest, not in the dead of night. Rationalization warred with instinct. Perhaps they're blind, using my taillights as beacons. But why the rigid distance? Why not draw closer for safety? My fingers scrabbled for my phone. Call whom? The authorities. There's a car. It has no lights. It's following me. The words sounded thin, hysterical, even in the echo chamber of my mind. As doubt gnawed, a junction loomed, the turnoff for home, a quieter vein leading toward my small town. Impulse seized me. At the very last moment, I held my course, remaining on the main highway. Without hesitation, the umbral shape behind me flowed into my lane, cleaving to my trajectory. My heart became a frantic drum against my ribs. No coincidence. This was deliberate. My foot mashed the pedal. Velocity climbed, blurring the legal limits into irrelevance. Effortlessly, the pursuer matched my pace, that precise, maddening gap unwavering. Rain lashed the windscreen, wipers battling a losing war against the deluge. Road markings smeared into watery suggestions. Yet, slowing down felt like surrender. Other vehicles occasionally surged past, their headlights momentarily bathing my mirror in stark white. Each time I strained for a glimpse of my stalker, desperate for confirmation, for proof against encroaching madness. But the glare revealed only impenetrable black where the car should be. Then, as the passing lights faded, the phantom would recoalesce, steadfast, lightless. Another exit approached. A reckless notion bloomed in the panic. Waiting until the absolute final second, I wrenched the wheel, slewing across 2 lanes toward the off-ramp. Tires screamed descent on the slick tarmac. The car threatened to spin, a heart-stopping fishtail I barely corrected. Down the ramp I plunged, eyes flicking to the mirror, convinced the sudden violence of my maneuver must surely have broken the connection. Ice water sluiced through my veins. It was still there. How? The reaction time defied physics. Unless it anticipated my every thought. The exit bled onto a serpentine country road, picturesque by daylight, perhaps. Now, under the storm's fury, it was a corridor of nightmare. Ancient trees clawed at the sky, skeletal branches reaching. The road coiled, blind turns promising unseen hazards. I drove with a desperate urgency, pushing the limits on curves that sent jolts of adrenaline through me. Yet, regardless of my speed, my recklessness, the shadow clung, implacable. My gaze snagged on the fuel gauge. The needle quivered perilously close to empty. Panic had eclipsed practicality. 20 miles left, 30 with extreme fortune. And the nearest sanctuary, a gas station, was an unknown distance away. As if sensing my vulnerability, the pursuing car surged forward, abruptly closing the gap for the first time. I demanded more from my engine, the whine protesting as I forced it up a steep incline, running purely on desperation and fumes. Cresting a hill, a sight sparked a flare of hope. Headlights, approaching from the opposite direction. Relief washed over me, potent and dizzying. Another soul, a witness, someone to validate this terrifying reality. I flashed my high beams frantically, a Morse code of distress. The oncoming vehicle resolved into a pickup truck, drawing nearer. Just as it was about to pass, my eyes darted reflexively to the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. I slammed the brakes. My car skidded, tires losing purchase on the sodden asphalt. The truck's horn blared, a startled bellow as it swerved, but the sound barely registered. My focus was locked on the mirror, on a sheer impossibility of the vacant road. No lights, no lurking silhouette, nothing. I sat, hands trembling on the wheel, the rain drumming a relentless rhythm on the roof. Had I conjured it all? A hallucination born of stress, exhaustion, and the disorienting storm. A sharp tap on my window made me flinch violently. The truck driver peered in, concern etched on his face, rain dripping from his cap brim. I lowered the window fractionally. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice muffled by the downpour. "Saw your lights flashing. Car trouble." My mouth opened, then closed. Explanation felt futile, insane. I thought I saw something. I managed, the lie tasting like ash. An animal crossing. Sorry if I startled you. He gave a slow nod, skepticism lingering in his eyes. "Okay, just be careful. Road's nasty tonight. Next town's maybe 10 miles down if you need anything. I murmured thanks. He retreated to his truck, its red taillights soon swallowed by the rain and darkness. Taking a shuddering breath, I tried to regain equilibrium. Perhaps it was just imagination. The rain, the late hour, the twisting road, a perfect crucible for fear. Readying myself to drive on, my gaze fell upon the passenger seat. A slip of paper rested there. I knew with absolute certainty it hadn't been there moments before. With shaking fingers, I retrieved it. Unfamiliar script sprawled across the surface. The message froze the blood in my veins. Enjoyed the chase, Ilara. Until next time. My head snapped up, eyes scanning the oppressive dark, searching every shadow, every space between the trees. Nothing. Only the relentless rain, the skeletal trees, and the vacant ribbon of road. I crushed the note, the paper crumpling in my fist, and hurled it into the night. Then, engaging the engine, I drove, heedless of speed limits, until the sanctuary of my garage embraced the car, the heavy door sealing the world out. That was 3 weeks ago. Night driving is a memory I don't indulge. My routes are varied now, confined to busy thoroughfares, navigated only under the indifferent gaze of the sun. I've swept my car for alien electronics, changed the locks, entertained fantasies of relocation. Futile gestures, I suspect, because the entity in that lightless car wasn't tracking my vehicle. It was tracking me. This terrifying game hasn't concluded. It's merely paused, awaiting the next move. So now, darkness finds me by the window, watching the empty street below, waiting for the inevitable glide of a shadow car, devoid of headlights, turning the corner onto my block. Its arrival is certain, only the timing remains unknown. And when it comes, I will be ready. The role of the mouse is no longer mine to play. This time, the claws will be my own. Skeletal structures, abandoned to entropy, held an irresistible magnetism for Elias. Solitude called this time, leading him not to familiar haunts shared with companions, but towards the hulking silhouette of a derelict warehouse staining the town's frayed edge. A place glimpsed 100 times in passing, never breached. Its broken eyes stared blankly, its skin scabbed with graffiti. A perfect crypt for forgotten things, ripe for trespass. Parking blocks away, Elias approached on foot, a familiar tremor, part exhilaration, part primal caution, vibrating beneath his ribs. The warehouse swelled against the bruised twilight sky, a monolithic shadow exhaling the faint metallic tang of oil and decay, underscored by a deeper note of stagnant dampness. His flashlight sliced the gloom as he slipped through a splintered doorway, a wound in the building's side. Instantly, the city's hum vanished, swallowed by profound stillness. Air thick with history, dust motes dancing like microscopic ghosts in the beam. Vastness unfolded within. Rusted behemoths of machinery stood sentinel in long rows, skeletal pallets clawed high along grime-streaked walls, draped in the lace of spiders. He navigated the metallic labyrinth slowly, his torch beam a solitary probe into the cavernous dark. The silence pressed in, heavy as velvet, punctuated only by the crunch of debris underfoot. Phantom noises, a metallic groan, the scurry of something unseen, made him freeze, breath held captive, ears straining. Each time only emptiness greeted his sweeping light, only shadows clinging to derelict forms. Deeper he ventured, past scattered, rust-eaten tools, and silent congregations of oil drums, monuments to industries long dead. A cautious ease began to settle, curiosity overriding the initial prickle of fear. Then, rounding a stack of warped crates, Elias's breath hitched. Not 10 feet away, materializing from the dense shadows, stood a man. Gaunt, grizzled, clad in clothes that seemed molded to him by filth and time. He simply was there, fixed, his gaze locking onto Elias with an unnerving, unwavering intensity. Not the transient look of a squatter disturbed, but something else. Possessive. Ancient. No bedroll, no meager possessions hinted at residence. Only stillness, as if he were part of the warehouse's decay, waiting. Elias recoiled, lifting the flashlight beam defensively. Apologies, he managed, the word thin in the heavy air. Didn't realize anyone was here. The man remained inert, a statue carved from grime, his eyes fathomless. Silence pulsed, thick and suffocating. A cold slickness traced Elias's spine. Every nerve screamed, "Flee!" Yet his boots felt welded to the concrete floor. Finally, a voice scraped from the man's throat, low and rough as rusted metal. "You don't belong." Elias swallowed against a suddenly parched throat. "Just looking around. I'll leave." A slow, deliberate shake of the head, eyes never breaking contact. This place, not safe. Not for your kind. A tremor ran through Elias. The words weren't loud, not overtly menacing, yet they resonated with a chilling certainty, a knowledge Elias couldn't fathom. "Right. Going now," he stammered, forcing a backward step. The man, Silas, didn't impede him, but as Elias turned, a final whisper ghosted through the space, colder than the damp air. "They see you. They'll sizz." The word echoed, multiplying in the cavernous space. Elias didn't question, didn't dare. He pivoted, while forcing a measured pace back through the aisles of sleeping machines, the man's gaze burning into his back. The moment a corner hit him, discipline shattered. He ran. Footsteps hammered against the concrete, swallowed by the immense dark. His heart slammed against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive silence. Bursting through the fractured doorway, he gasped the cool, clean night air, leaning against the rough brick, trying to quell the frantic rhythm in his chest. He scanned the entrance. Empty. The warehouse loomed, silent, inscrutable. Walking briskly towards his distant car, a compulsion made him glance back one last time. His blood froze. High above, framed in a jagged second-story window, stood a silhouette. Not Silas. This shape was taller, wider-shouldered, possessing an unsettling geometry that felt distinctly other. It stood perfectly still, a stark cutout against the gloom within, its attention fixed solely on him. Watching. Elias scrambled into his car, engine roaring to life, tires spitting gravel as he fled. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. He couldn't bear to know if the watcher remained. Miles dissolved beneath his wheels, but the distance felt meaningless. Days later, the encounter festers. It wasn't just the gaunt sentinel in the shadows, but the silent observer high above. Something else resided in that decaying husk, an entity whose presence seeped into his waking thoughts, staining his sleep with formless dread. The feeling persists, sharpest in the quiet hours, the unnerving certainty of unseen eyes, patient and cold, waiting in the darkness, waiting for his return. The world dissolved into rain, miles from anywhere tangible, the moment Alara's engine surrendered its ghost. A percussive onslaught hammered the car's thin roof as she sat, adrift in the sudden, profound silence. Hours she'd driven, chasing the phantom of home, only for the dashboard lights to execute a final, frantic flicker before succumbing entirely. Fortune's cruel jest. She slumped against the headrest, gaze lost in the torrent sluicing down the windscreen, a chill seeping from the metal veins of the car into her own. No comforting glow of street lamps pierced the oppressive dark. No kindred headlights shared the ribbon of asphalt flanked by impenetrable forest. Her phone, predictably, offered only mocking silence. No bars, no lifeline. Typical. Drawing a steadying breath against the rising tide of isolation, Alara considered her meager options. The last outpost of civilization, a gas station glimpsed miles back, seemed a punishing trek through the deluge. Then, a flicker. Twin beams sliced through the curtain of rain, growing steadily brighter, approaching from behind. A fragile hope fluttered in her chest. Salvation, perhaps, or at least passage to that distant station. Shoving the door open against the wind, she stepped into the downpour, waving frantically as the vehicle slowed, its bulk pulling onto the shoulder behind her defunct car. It was a rusting behemoth of a pickup, scarred by time and toil. The driver's side window descended with a reluctant groan, revealing a man, perhaps 40-something, a thicket of beard obscuring his jaw, a faded cap pulled low like a shroud over his eyes. He regarded her, and a dissonance hummed beneath the surface of her relief, a warning bell muffled by the downpour. Trouble. His voice was a gravelly murmur that seemed dredged from the storm itself. Yes, completely dead, Alara managed. Battery, I think. Any chance you have jumper cables? He nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, his gaze drifting towards her car. Might have something. Mind if I look? Please, she said, stepping back gratefully. He emerged from the cab with a measured gait, his heavy boots grinding on the wet gravel as he approached her vehicle. He bent, peering into the engine bay, wordless amidst the roar of the rain. The downpour plastered his clothes to a frame, soaking Alara to the bone, yet he seemed utterly indifferent. She watched, a sliver of optimism piercing the gloom. Maybe this stranger, Silas, was her unlikely rescuer. But then he straightened, turning back to her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Or just the battery, looks like, he stated, his voice retaining its flat, low timbre. Could take a bit. Alara's stomach plummeted. Oh, right. Well, could you possibly give me a lift to that gas station back down the road? He paused, considering, before offering another slow nod. Sure thing. Get in. A flicker of hesitation, that earlier unease resurfacing. But the biting cold, the relentless rain, the sheer desolation. Her choices were stark. She climbed into the passenger seat, the door thudding shut behind her, as Silas settled back behind the wheel. The cab's air was thick with stale tobacco, and an unidentifiable, vaguely metallic tang. Silas coaxed the engine back to life, its growl a counterpoint to the storm as they merged onto the highway. Silence stretched between them for several minutes, punctuated only by the hypnotic rhythm of the wipers, battling the relentless cascade against the glass. "How far is the station, roughly?" Alara asked, needing to break the oppressive quiet. He didn't respond immediately, his focus seemingly welded to the rain-lashed road, knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Not far," he eventually offered. She nodded, but an unsettling quality in his tone snagged at her nerves. Shifting uncomfortably, she peered through the side window. The deluge rendered the world abstract, a smear of rushing, indistinct shapes swallowed by the night. More minutes bled into an amorphous stretch before he spoke again, his voice softer now, almost conspiratorial. "Good thing I showed. Ain't many travel this stretch after dark." "Yes, lucky," Alara replied, forcing a brittle smile. He slanted a glance her way, his eyes shadowed pools, inscrutable. "What are you making for?" "Home," she answered curtly, unwilling to offer more. He nodded again, lapsing back into a silence that felt heavier, fraught with unspoken things. Tension coiled in the small space, Alara's heart beginning a nervous tattoo against her ribs. Something about this man felt fundamentally wrong, a primal instinct screaming caution. Time warped in the confines of the truck. Alara glanced at the dashboard clock. It was defunct, frozen at some forgotten hour. They had surely been driving longer than anticipated. Are we nearly there?" she ventured, striving for a casual tone that frayed around the edges. Again, the pause before his reply, his gaze unwavering from the road ahead. Finally, colder than before. Not much longer. A shiver traced its path down her spine. The landscape outside, glimpsed through sheets of rain, offered no familiar landmarks. Only the endless, looming sentinels of trees marching into the blackness. Her pulse escalated, panic beginning its insidious creep. This wasn't the way. They couldn't possibly be nearing the gas station. Taking another shaky breath, she pressed. "Are you certain this is the right direction? I don't recall it being this far out." He shot her a look, his eyes narrowing fractionally. "Don't you worry. Know this road like my own hand." The assertion, meant perhaps to reassure, instead made her skin crawl. She shifted again, her gaze flicking towards the door handle, her fingers twitching with the urge to grasp it. The storm raged, but the thought of facing the elements suddenly seemed preferable to remaining captive in this suffocating proximity. Before the impulse could translate into action, Silas wrenched the wheel without preamble, the truck lurching violently onto a barely visible track swallowed by the woods. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a cold sweat prickling her forehead. "Where are we going? Why are we stopping here?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite her efforts. He turned to her then, a slow, unnerving smile twisting his lips. "Just a small detour. Won't be but a minute." Her instincts shrieked. "Get out! Run!" But a desperate need for strategy held her frozen. She fumbled for her phone, the useless screen confirming her utter isolation. He cut the engine, plunging them into a silence made heavier by the drumming rain on the metal roof. He simply sat, watching her, that disquieting smile fixed in place. "All right," he murmured, his voice low, glacial. "Let's go." Alara remained motionless, her hand now clamped tight on the door handle. "Go. Where?" He leaned slightly closer, his smile widening into something predatory. "Come on now. Don't bite." That was the breaking point. Adrenaline surged. She flung the door open and scrambled out into the churning mud and rain, her heart exploding in her chest. No backward glance, only flight, feet slipping, stumbling deeper into the lightless embrace of the woods. Behind her, his voice erupted, sharp and angry, echoing through the trees. "Where do you think you're going?" She didn't answer, didn't falter, fueled by sheer terror. Rain blinded her. Her lungs burned with ragged, panicked breaths. She could hear him now, the heavy, rapid thud of his pursuit closing the distance. Her muscles screamed, protesting the frantic pace, but she pushed onward, refusing the fatal urge to look back. Directionless, her only imperative was distance, escape from him. The forest became a tangle of grasping branches that tore at her clothes and skin, the sucking mud impeding every desperate stride. Better the indifferent wilderness, she thought wildly, than whatever fate he intended. Then, hope flickered again, a faint luminescence piercing the oppressive gloom ahead. She stumbled towards it, heart pounding like a drum against her ribs, praying for sanctuary. A house, a cabin, any sign of human presence. Closer now, it resolved into a small, dilapidated shack, its windows dark voids, the door hanging slightly ajar. There was no choice. She burst through the opening, slamming the weathered wood shut behind her, leaning heavily against it, gasping for air. The cabin was deserted, steeped in silence and the smell of damp decay. But it was shelter. It was separation. Footsteps sounded outside, slow, deliberate, circling the structure. Alara's heart leaped into her throat. Her hands trembled as she pressed herself flat against the wall, straining to remain invisible, silent. The footsteps paused directly outside the door. She held her breath, suspended in terror, willing him away. But the hinges groaned, protesting the intrusion, and his silhouette filled the doorway, stark against the storm-lit night. He stepped inside, eyes methodically sweeping the small space, that grotesque smile returning. "There you are," he breathed, the words thick with menace. "Told you. Nowhere to run." Alara retreated, scrabbling backward, her hands blindly seeking purchase, defense. Her fingers closed around the cold, heavy steel of a rusted wrench lying on a dust-covered table. She gripped it, knuckles white, a desperate resolve hardening within her. He advanced a step, his gaze locked onto hers, the smile stretching wider. "You really thought you could just leave?" Silence was her only reply, punctuated by her own ragged breathing, the frantic thrumming in her ears. He took another step. She swung the wrench with all her might, connecting solidly with his shoulder. He staggered, a grunt of pain escaping him, but didn't fall. His eyes, when they met hers again, were dark with fury. "Gonna regret that," he snarled, lunging. She swung again, catching him on the side, but he absorbed the blow, his hand shooting out, clamping around her arm like a vice. Panic flared, raw and overwhelming. She twisted, struggled, kicked out wildly, connecting sharply with his shin. He stumbled, his grip momentarily loosening. Enough. She wrenched free and bolted, a primal scream tearing from her throat as she flung herself back out the door. back into the relentless rain, his enraged shouts echoing behind her. No stopping, no looking back, only the desperate pounding of feet on sodden earth. The rain was a blinding curtain, her lungs raw fire. His curses pursued her, fueled by rage, but they were just sounds swallowed by the storm and her singular focus: escape, distance, survival. Then, after an eternity measured in heartbeats and burning muscles, the impossible gleam of headlights pierced the darkness far ahead. She stumbled towards the road, a ragged silhouette waving frantically, praying, pleading for the approaching vehicle to stop. The car slowed, pulling onto the shoulder, its lights illuminating her drenched, desperate figure. The moment remains etched, crystalline. Me, Elias, paused in the bedroom threshold, surveying the newly painted expanse. A pale hue I'd chosen, hoping for light, for openness. My brushwork had been deliberate, strokes laid smooth. The surface left a cure overnight. Morning arrived. I stepped inside and halted. Against the far corner near the baseboard, minute crimson freckles marred the finish, pinhead-sized, scattered like blood spatter from a microscopic wound. Closer inspection revealed no texture. They were utterly flat, seamlessly integrated into the paint itself. A tentative fingertip brushed one. No smear, no dampness. Confusion, yes, but no real alarm yet. A flaw in the emulsion, perhaps. Some ghost in the primer rising. I'd address it after work. A shrug, a departure. Evening found me back, armed with a touch-up brush and the residual paint. The overhead light clicked on, revealing not the same faint constellation, but a proliferation. More blemishes. And they had migrated, stretching into delicate thread-like lines that snaked inches across the wall in arbitrary vectors. Disquiet stirred. My first thought, contamination. I hauled the paint can outside, beneath the stark glare of the porch lamp, stirred its contents. Perfectly uniform. No errant pigment swirled within. A tremor of unease, quickly suppressed. A bizarre chemical interaction, surely. Back inside, door shut, I switched on a softer lamp, the better to operate without blinding myself. I meticulously applied a fresh coat over the afflicted corner, broad strokes ensuring coverage well beyond the scarlet tracery. Then, retreat to the living room, the television a flickering distraction while the paint dried. My thoughts drifted, yet persistently snagged on the possibility of a primer mistake. 2 hours crawled by. I returned. A palm pressed flat against the wall confirmed dryness. I flicked the main light switch. Gone. The marks had vanished. Relief washed over me, a palpable loosening in my shoulders. I cleaned my brush, tidied up, and sought sleep. Around 2 a.m., thirst pulled me from bed. Passing the bedroom door en route to the kitchen, I perceived a faint, pulsing glow bleeding from the gap beneath it. Pushing the door inward revealed a strange, ruby luminescence flickering along the very section I'd repainted. Muted, insufficient to truly illuminate, yet stark against the pre-dawn gloom. I edged forward. The lines were back, thin, branching in chaotic, organic patterns that seemed to writhe with the play of shadows. Seconds ticked by as I stared, transfixed. My hand found the light switch. Click. The spectral glow vanished beneath the sudden artificial glare, but the crimson lines remained, more vivid now, somehow bolder, as if they'd aggressively pushed through the second layer of paint. My stomach clenched. A frantic drummer took up residence in my chest. A scan of the room yielded nothing. No leaks, no fissures, no rational source. Another touch. The wall remained cool, solid. The lines offered no resistance, didn't flake or bleed. They simply were. Sleep became an elusive quarry that night. I sprawled on the living room sofa, channel surfing numbly, trying to outrun the image seared behind my eyelids. Morning light brought a call to the hardware store. Had they encountered anything like this? Red stains manifesting post-painting. The voice on the line offered blank incomprehension. Mold, maybe. Rust leaching from old pipes. When I hesitantly mentioned the nocturnal glow, a pause, then a soft chuckle. Never heard of such a thing. I hung up, flushed with embarrassment and simmering frustration. A full-scale offensive was required. The entire room. Back to the store I drove, acquiring a different brand of primer, superior paint. Saturday became a blur of preparation. Light sanding, meticulous wiping down with damp cloths until the plaster gleamed, clean and bare. Primer applied with painstaking care. During the drying interlude, a simple meal, water, constant anxious glances towards the walls. Nothing. For hours, the primer held, pristine. The sharp, clean scent of potential renewal filled the house. That evening, the new paint rolled on. A richer, more expensive formulation I prayed would seal whatever malignant presence bled through. I worked late, fueled by nervous energy. By night's end, the bedroom radiated smooth, unblemished perfection. A flicker of fragile pride. I cracked the window, letting the fumes escape and retreated, leaving the room to its overnight cure. Midnight found me not in the bedroom, but coiled on the sofa again. Sleep in there felt premature. The house settled into silence, thick with the lingering tang of fresh paint. My eyelids grew heavy, but a wire of tension hummed beneath my skin. Eventually, oblivion claimed me. Hours later, a dream. The walls constricting, pressing damply against my shoulders, the air thick with suffocating paint vapor. Trapped. I jolted awake, gasping, forehead slick with sweat, hands icy. Staring at the shadowed ceiling, I forced myself upright. A stealthy creep down the hallway. An ear pressed to the bedroom door. Silence. Turning the knob felt momentous. I inhaled sharply and stepped across the threshold. Darkness greeted me initially. Then, my eyes adjusted. The lines had returned, resurrected. They commanded more territory now. Intricate networks sprawling across the wall. Some tendrils clawing halfway to the ceiling. Bolder, more defined. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My throat felt tight, constricted. No visible breach in the new paint, yet the crimson calligraphy shone through. Stay calm. I fumbled the window open wider, inviting the cool wash of moonlight. A faint internal red glow traced select segments of the lines, an unhealthy pulse in the dimness. Nausea churned. I scrambled for my toolbox, retrieved a paint scraper. Surface stain, or something deeper. I pressed the blade against a minor section, scraped gently. Paint flaked away, revealing the primer beneath. The red markings persisted, embedded within the primer layer itself. More pressure. Scraping deeper, past the primer, down to the ghost of the previous paint job. Still there. The lines ran through every stratum. I straightened, a cold dread solidifying in my gut. This defied logic. Nothing should penetrate multiple layers unless something within the wall actively pushed out. conjured the phantom patterns. A bottle of water from the kitchen. Restless pacing in the living room. A professional painter. A contractor. Buns were tight, and explaining the glow, it sounded unhinged. Would they dismiss me? Or exploit my fear, demanding exorbitant sums to demolish the wall? The ensuing days saw a descent. Sleep fractured into uneasy shards. The claustrophobic dreams intensified, walls breathing, closing in. I'd wake drenched, limbs trembling. Just thinking about entering the bedroom made my hands shake. I tried avoidance, a desperate hope the phenomenon might exhaust itself, fade away. It didn't. The lines thickened, grew more audacious, colonizing new sections of the wall. Standing within the room in darkness revealed the persistent, dull luminescence. My heart rate would spike. A fine tremor would start in my hands. The room itself felt heavier, the air stagnant, charged. One evening, driven by desperation, I attempted a chemical assault. Strong bleach solution, window wide for ventilation, gloved hands scrubbing furiously at a patch near the corner. The caustic liquid streamed down the paint, yet the scarlet stain remained stubbornly intact. Wiping with a cloth merely smeared the bleach. The color held fast. Fumes stung my eyes. I flung the rag into the utility sink, rubbed my forehead, acutely aware of the knots tightening across my shoulders. A few nights later, a sound, faint, emanating from the bedroom. A dry clicking, almost a tapping. I rose from the sofa, approached the door with caution, turned the knob with excruciating slowness, cracked it open an inch. The ruby glow painted the interior walls. I slipped inside. The lines seemed to pulsate, a subtle, rhythmic throb accompanying the faint clicking. It lasted mere seconds, then ceased. I stood frozen, heart pounding, palms clammy, knees weak. The overhead light banished the glow, but the lines glared back, defiant. Tapping the wall with my knuckles produced only a solid, mundane thud. A shaky exhale, another retreat. The nightmares escalated, grew tactile. Red ichor dripping from the walls, touching my skin. Waking felt like surfacing from a drowning depth, chest tight, breath shallow. Mornings began with trembling legs, a parched mouth, headaches that clung for hours. Concentration at work dissolved. Evenings were spent either staring at the closed bedroom door or pacing the confines of the living room like a caged animal. One final desperate attempt. Seal it. Bury it. I spared no expense. Heavy-duty sealant, a premium roller, the most robust paint available. An entire Saturday sacrificed to the ritual. Every square inch coated. Sealant applied liberally. Even a trim received a fresh coat. Windows flung open, I watched, hawk-eyed, for hours as it dried. Nothing. Not a single blemish. That evening, a fragile tendril of hope unfurled within me. My muscles relaxed fractionally. I watched a film, managing moments of genuine distraction. Around midnight, a final check before contemplating sleep, perhaps even in the reclaimed bedroom. Flashlight in hand, the house utterly still. I pushed the door open, swept the beam across the pristine surfaces. Empty at first. Then the light snagged on them. Outlines faint but undeniable. The red lines had breached the final defense, manifesting through the sealant, through the expensive paint. Sharper now, running in wild, chaotic vectors. A vice clamped around my chest, stealing my breath. I dropped the flashlight onto the dresser, instinctively hitting the overhead switch. The lines blazed under the light, more potent than ever. Panic surged, cold and electric. My feet felt nailed to the floorboards. Eyes locked on the crimson network, which seemed to shimmer, to shift minutely before my gaze. A step forward, compelled. Palm pressed against one of the thicker lines near the corner. Warmth. Distinct, unnatural warmth radiated from it. I snatched my hand back as if burned. A strangled gasp escaped my throat. Backing away, eyes fixed on the wall, I fumbled for the flashlight, killed the overhead light, and fled the room. My hand shook so violently, I nearly dropped the light again. The door slammed shut behind me. I leaned against it, breath tearing through me, shirt clinging damply to my back, the frantic thudding of my heart echoing in my ears. Living here, like this, felt impossible. I locked the bedroom door, applied strips of heavy-duty tape around the entire frame, sealing it like a tomb. What else was there to do? Sleep, fragmented and haunted, found me on the sofa again. The same suffocating dream, wakened with a gasp, body aching. The following day passed in a haze of exhaustion, limbs leaden, head throbbing. Occasional checks, peering through a tiny gap I'd left in the tape, confirmed the lines remained, glowing faintly in the perpetual twilight within. The house itself began to feel tainted. I manufactured reasons to stay out late. Long drives after work, fast food consumed in the anonymous solitude of my car. Crossing my own threshold brought a wave of oppressive heaviness. A mere glance towards the sealed bedroom door sent tremors through my hands. Faint ticking sounds sometimes whispered from beyond it at night. A constant gnawing unease became my shadow. My appetite vanished. Water and forced bites of food were met with nausea. Weeks bled together under this siege. Help was unavoidable. I contacted a general contractor, leaving a terse message about persistent wall staining, requesting an inspection. No mention of the glow, the warmth, the pulsing. Fear of disbelief kept my explanation carefully curated. Some kind of intractable seepage. I am waiting for the return call. I recount this now from the sofa, my sanctuary in prison. My gaze keeps snapping towards the hallway, towards the taped-up door. Breathing feels shallow, my legs jittery beneath the blanket. Relaxation is a foreign country. Avoidance is unsustainable. Yet the thought of those crimson marks, relentlessly pushing through layer upon layer of paint, ties a cold, hard knot deep in my belly. What transpires behind that sealed door? Are the lines still spreading, crawling across the ceiling, bleeding beneath the floorboards? I try not to imagine. I wait for a professional, someone to tear into the wall, to excise this growth, whatever it may be. Sleep offers little respite, rarely exceeding 3 or 4 broken hours. My eyelids burn, my neck aches with tension. The house presses in, a constant, subtle pressure. Sometimes, standing outside in the yard at night, I stare up at the bedroom window. Through the curtains, faint, rhythmic flickers of red. My chest constricts. Weakness floods my arms. The speed of this unraveling is bewildering. I have never felt so utterly powerless within my own walls. Recounting it, typing these words, is a fragile attempt to anchor myself. A soft sound drifts from the hallway, behind the wall. That steady, dry tapping. It pauses, resumes. My heart hammers against my ribs. A A fine sheen of sweat pricks my skin. Palms wiped repeatedly on denim. Trapped. Can't go in there. Can't ignore it. Just waiting. There's no smell, no moldy decay, no chemical tang, no hint of gas. Only this pervasive sense of weight, infiltrating my breath, settling in my gut. A nagging psychic pressure that refuses to yield. Questions swarm, unanswered. Will the contractors find rot, faulty wiring, pipes bleeding rust? Or will they find nothing tangible, leaving me alone with this impossible reality? How much longer can I endure this? All I know for certain is that every attempt to conceal, to erase, was met with defiance. The marks returned stronger, brighter, spreading their tendrils across the plaster, glowing with a sickly, internal light in the darkness. They inhabit my dreams. I feel their phantom pressure when I lie down. That room is not safe. This house is not safe. And that is the deepest horror. Tense, restless, waiting for deliverance, or perhaps for the walls to finally close in for good.